So that's probably my biggest challenge. I'm not naturally an extrovert, but I do think for whatever reason, I early on had this gift of leadership, which I suspect you have as well, um, and found myself in the front of the group often,
Mm,
and sort of accepted it over time that this is okay. I was uncomfortable in that role. I was involved in a training environment several years ago, and after it was over, I was talking to one of the guys that was working with me, and I said, "Next time we do this, I'll work for you." And he said, without even thinking, "No, there's two kind of people in this world. There's people like you, and there's people like me.
mm,
People like me work for people like you."
mm.
And it was the first time I'd ever recognized maybe there is something going on here that I'm unaware of. And so I had to grow into that. And when we teach leadership, we teach how to become comfortable in that role, being the visionary, being the courageous one, being the person in the front. Well, how you doing, buddy?
What's up, sir? How are you?
I'm doing great.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you so much for being willing to do this interview. Marine Corps background, CEO, been an entrepreneur, business owner for a long time. What have been some of your biggest leadership insights that you
Mm.
have learned throughout your experience?
Yeah, so leadership's my thing, as you know. So I got my doctorate in. It's my the vertical you and I know each other from. So it's something I've studied long and hard, thought about long and hard, created some models of leadership based on that thought, that those experiences and those thoughts. So I could literally talk to you for days about that question. So I guess I should start with the idea that courage is the foundation of leadership.
Mm.
Um, you've walked through some of that model with us, if not all of it. And I I teach that and I try to lead with that because I think it's absolutely true. That to demonstrate any of the characteristics of leadership, you must first be courageous enough to be willing and able to do that, to to say I have what it takes to be a leader.
And where does that come from? How does one develop it? Where does it come from? How is it formed?
A lot of leadership is a mystery even. So we've only been studying leadership for a little over 100 years.
Mm.
We've been leading for millennia, but only studying it for a little over 100 years. And it's one of those things that I don't know where it comes from. It's like drive or charisma or any of those other characteristics of leadership. Where does the courage to be that leader come from? When we first started studying leadership, we thought it was great men. Right? You were born that way.
Mm.
You were an Eisenhower or you weren't. You were a Washington or you weren't. You were a king or you weren't. But we've learned over time that, yeah, you can pick up these competencies of leadership. Some people, of course, are naturally gifted, just like they're gifted in golf or gifted in music. So people are gifted in leadership. But the average person, such as myself, can, through study and effort, learn how to lead. You can learn how to be courageous, even if you weren't gifted with courage naturally. And it's not
And
the same kind of, I'm sorry,
no, go
it's
ahead.
not the same kind of courage of valor on a battlefield. That's not what I'm talking about. It's an intestinal courage that you could, bring the willingness and ability to get in front of a group of people and espouse a vision and say, here's where we're going and this is why, and I want you to follow me there. So,
Yeah, almost like even just a willingness to get out of one's comfort zone, I feel like.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. So you have to, and I try to talk the talk and walk the walk. So I'm a lifelong learner, but as a lifelong learner, I'm also a lifelong novice. And so
Mhm.
I'm always uncomfortable. I'm trying to learn Spanish. I've lived with a native Spanish speaker for 37 years, and I'm still trying. I was on the phone this morning with a tutoring company. I'm just not gifted in that, but I'm not going to give it up.
Right, that's right. That's awesome. And my Spanish, I grew up, my mom is a Hispanic lady, and she raised me speaking Spanish, and so but it's not formal, so I have to a lot of times,
Hmm.
I'll have to say a lot of other words to get to where I'm going to if I don't know the name of something, so but I love that concept of just being a lifelong learner, love that. What has been one of the biggest leadership challenges that you have had to overcome personally, in your leadership journey?
Yeah, I have a ferocious temper,
Mm,
and I've beaten it into submission over the years. And it presents itself every once in a while unexpectedly.
mm,
And I spend weeks, if not months, repairing the damage from that. And so even after all these decades of being a leader, that escapes the bag once in a while.
mm,
Um, so that's probably my biggest challenge. I'm not naturally an extrovert, but I do think for whatever reason, I early on had this gift of leadership, which I suspect you have as well, um, and found myself in the front of the group often,
mm,
and sort of accepted it over time that this is okay. I was uncomfortable in that role. I was involved in a training environment several years ago, and after it was over, I was talking to one of the guys that was working with me, and I said, "Next time we do this, I'll work for you." And he said, without even thinking, "No, there's two kind of people in this world. There's people like you, and there's people like me.
mm,
People like me work for people like you."
mm.
And it was the first time I'd ever recognized maybe there is something going on here that I'm unaware of. And so I had to grow into that. And when we teach leadership, we teach how to become comfortable in that role, being the visionary, being the courageous one, being the person in the front. I'm
That's
not
great.
naturally.
Yeah, that's great. The analogy sometimes that I'll use is the David and Jonathan analogy, where
Mm.
David is out front, Jonathan is the 2IC or the XO that is supporting David. And I really think that there's leadership on both parts. It just shows up to the world maybe a little bit differently. And honestly, I don't know that one is more important than the other, because I think a lot of times the David needs that Jonathan, and vice
Hmm.
versa, and kind of figuring out, and maybe it's timing in people's lives, or maybe it's, hey, some people are more cut out to be a David, maybe some people are better fit maybe in the Jonathan role. But I love your concept that I really think that everyone can be a leader in their own, way, and in their own industry and in their own lives and families, and it's just connecting with that, maybe that inner leader, and those traits and stuff, which brings me to, I think it also takes emotional intelligence
Hmm.
to be an effective leader.
Hmm.
Now, I won't say that it's required, to be a leader, you have to have emotional intelligence. I would argue that, but I've met a lot of people, leaders that are not don't have a lot of
Hmm.
EQ.
Hmm.
What is that relationship between emotional intelligence and leadership?
Yeah, that's another multiple days conversation. So this is something I've grown into, this whole EQ thing. I'm a absolute firm believer. Um, I love your EQ mafia, and I love listening to you talk about your journey,
Mm,
your journey to EQ. So we talk about this when we teach leadership, the technical, cognitive, and emotional continuum. When we first start our careers, we're focused on that technical piece, the law, the medicine, the whatever it is that technical thing that we need. Shooting, running, if you're a Marine like I was. But then you go into this cognitive space where you're making decisions, collecting data, conducting analysis with that data. Um, and then you can decide, do I want to go further and beyond the technical and the cognitive? And do I want to engage in emotional intelligent leadership? You don't have to do that. You could stay in the T and the C your whole life and be very successful. But really, I think, and this is just one voice, to optimize your leadership and to optimize your value to yourself and your organization that you work with, whether it's your work or your church or your soccer club, you have to engage in EQ. And we all have a little bit different definition of what we mean by that. For me, it's, am I willing to build and sustain relationships with other human beings
Mm.
purposefully as a value proposition? And then introduce others so that they can build and sustain relationships. And that being your primary value proposition to the world, you're no longer rebuilding engines. You're no longer uh, using your medical skills, your law skills. You're an executive leader. You're an emotionally intelligent leader.
What does an emotionally intelligent leader look like versus an unintelligent, or a leader that has not developed his emotional intelligence or her emotional intelligence? What do both look like?
Sure. I'll go back to our coaching world. When you're coaching well, you're coaching the person, not the problem. When you're coaching the problem, you're doing T and C. You're being technical and cognitive. When you're approaching the person, you're trying to make that human to human connection and really find out what's going on in that person's mind, and what emotions are they feeling, and how are those emotions impacting how they're interacting with the world, what they believe about themselves, what they perceive about themselves, and what they perceive about the world, and how they're behaving in that world. That's where the real value of coaching is. The T and the C, yeah, that's nice. It's value added, but it's really the E, the emotional piece.
That's awesome. What I have found just in my past, 4 years being in this specifically in the emotional intelligence space of leadership, just how much our emotions impact our behavior, our
Hmm.
performance, and the
Hmm.
outcomes and the patterns and the trends. And for me, the way it has worked out is when I've addressed the emotional aspect of whatever's going on inside of me, then I was able to impact the behavior. But
Hmm.
until I address that emotion, I would always find myself making maybe a temporary fix in behavior, but then reverting back to my unproductive behavior because I hadn't ever done that deep dive of,
Mm.
and why am I doing this behavior?
Yeah, yeah.
Here's another one. So, in regards to emotional intelligence, at what point in your journey did you realize, like, man, there's this other dimension of leadership
Hmm.
maybe that I had not explored? At what point did you become aware of emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I certainly wasn't calling it that way back in the day, but I knew there was something else beyond the T and the C, the technical and the cognitive, because as I was getting promoted higher and higher in rank, people were began to observe me that, well, maybe that's not so important, right?
Mm,
Maybe how fast you can run 3 miles or how well you can shoot isn't necessarily the most important thing in the world. Maybe there's other components of your leadership that might be important here. Um, and so I knew I wanted to be the best leader I could be, and so I said I have to go learn and begin perceiving the world in this way and behaving in this way.
mm. What are some ideas or tips, suggestions, insights in leading leaders that are lacking emotional intelligence?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. I would like to say I have the magic solution for you, but again, I go back to a place of courage. I put my daughter in the CEO chair 4 or 5 years ago, and I told her, unless you're willing to make the decisions necessary as a CEO, don't take this job.
Mm,
And one of those is the emotional well-being of your team and the emotional intelligence of the leaders of that team. And so it's embedded in our core values, and we try to live our core values, not just write them down and talk about them. And so that kind of familial culture requires emotional intelligence. I mean, think about the love within a family. And I use that word specifically, right? That's
Mm,
something that's becoming more and more common in the business world and outside of family, because that's what it is. There's many kinds of love. I don't have any. I think there's many different definitions of love in the Greek language. It's not the kind of love I have for my wife and my children, but it's still a love, and that requires emotional intelligence. And so, if you want that in your organization, so be purposeful about it, communicate it, but also demonstrate it.
mm,
So not only are you talking about it, but people see you doing it. We got a I got an email this morning about 7 a.m. from a team member that we had sent a Thanksgiving basket to, and thank you. This is why it's so great to be part of this company.
mm.
So that's the communication is in the core values, but the demonstration is then how are you doing those things?
Love it. That's awesome. And love that concept of, creating the culture and
Hmm.
something that the culture follows the leader. And if that, one of the things, my little taglines I like to say sometimes is emotionally healthy leaders create emotionally healthy cultures and
Hmm.
organizations, which create healthy outcomes and maximize outcomes and productivity. And I love that concept of how do you work with leaders that maybe have lower intelligence, is create a culture by you said model, communicate, and demonstrate the values that you're trying to convey and make as the fabric of your of undergirded with love, which
Hmm.
I love Jesus, and so love covers a multitude of sins. I think there's a power there's that's one of the most powerful emotions there is
Hmm.
love. So yeah, that's excellent. That's great. So I know we've got just a few more minutes here. What have been so in the hundreds and maybe thousands of leaders that you have been exposed to, observed, what are like, let's say, maybe the top 3 or 5 facts, right? Limiting factors of leaders over the course of your years in leadership that hinder leaders.
Wow. I'm just thinking extemporaneously here. Not having work family self balance. And when I say that, I don't mean anywhere near a third, and a third of work family self, but not having thought about and discussed openly with the people in your world that matter to you what is the right work family self balance for us, and where are we going, and why are we going there? Which brings up the other would be vision, right? Do you have a compelling vision? And you hear this many ways in current vernacular. What's your why from Simon Sinek?
Mhm,
For me, I use the word vision, and we help people project a 30-year vision. Like, where do you want to be when you're 89 years old,
mhm.
which is my case? And it's a little frightening to think about that. When you ask a 22-year-old, where do you want to be when you're 52? That's the first time in their life they've ever thought about that. And it's a little scary. But you absolutely have to do that. And it's big rocks. It's not the little things. You want to have your health. You want to have people who love you around you. You probably want to have had a successful career or in the middle of that successful career. You probably want to have created some kind of financial freedom for yourself. So, what is that vision? And then tie that back into the third one I would mention would be principles. What's important to you? What are your rights and wrongs? And when you write those down and you discuss them with the significant others in your life, I'm not asking you to be judgmental. Don't say these are mine and yours are wrong, but no, these are mine. And for those in your world that matter to you, what are our principles? What do we believe in? And so then again, putting those things together, what do we believe in? How are we going to do this together? And where are we going together? It becomes pretty powerful. And not having done that, you might very well end up at the apex of your career field. But I think you have a lot more chance if you're very purposeful about it.
Well, and then there's the dynamic, excuse me, there's the dynamic where, I've met a number of these leaders that have reached the apex and the pinnacle, and are not happy and they're not
Mhm.
satisfied. So maybe we started with a certain set of principles or values when we were 22 or 23
Mhm.
and never reassessed them. We got to the top and then looked around like, wow, this is not where I want to be, or it's not important to me anymore. But
Mhm.
I think I love that concept of just kind of re and making it part of your personal development plan is whether that's quarterly or annually, reevaluate those core values.
Yeah, you revisit them certainly, and they have to survive life. Things are gonna happen to you in life that you never foreseen. Illness, divorce, career changes. So whatever those big 3 things or 4 things are, they have to survive life. But then we back those off into more tangible 5-year goals and objectives, 1-year goals and objectives, and the real, proof, the real magic is today. What do you need to do today to add to that 30-year? And so as you put your head on your pillow at night, did I do those things I needed to do today to get me where I wanna go, where we wanna go?
Excellent. Okay, last question.
Sure.
What questions do you ask yourself on a regular basis?
Wow. And, it's gonna sound like I'm, playing into your hand, but I literally ask myself my calendar's color coded, and it's color coded with the things that I need to do to get to my 30-year vision,
Mm,
because I do have one even at 59. I It's getting where it's mathematically not likely I'll be there. I hope to be, but it's all about legacy for me now.
mm,
And so I ask myself, am I doing those things that I need to do to get there? So that's we use goals, objectives, and key results. That's my Goker's question of myself. Did I do those things that I needed to do? And then secondly, in your swim lane, am I exhibiting the emotional intelligence I need to exhibit to be the leader I want to be? And for me, it's all about, am I being gracious? Am I being humble? Am I being bold, powerful? All those things that make a strong, emotional, intelligent leader. And am I teaching others? So I'm not only a lifelong learner, but I like to be. It's one of my gokers to be a lifelong teacher. So
mm.
am I teaching enough?
Awesome. Thank you so much, JR. Totally appreciate how much you invest into so many leaders around the globe and your legacy. I don't know if your daughter told you, but that was one of the I asked her a series of questions about you. And because I'm a father and
Mm,
we've got a daughter, she's 14 years old. And so,
mm,
your relationship with your daughter is further down the road than mine. And I wanted to kind of glean some insights. And she shared some really, really insightful things that I'm looking forward to continue to add to my repertoire to
mm.
review as a father and as a leader. So thank you so much, JR, for all you do for all of us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Noble.